So here we have it. We're finally completing my All-Star faction. This is a video I've been putting off for a while, because where do we even begin with so many good actions in the game? The choice really is staggering, and that's made all the more difficult by some factions having several good actions. It's not only that though, but you have to try and keep some kind of consistency and balance with the cards that you choose, as well as complement the chosen minions. Unless you're playing as Kaiju, or Ancient Incas, then actions can't really win you the game, it takes minions to do that. Actions do help to speed up that process though, so it's important that the actions support your minions, and support the faction's overall strategy. Before we start, let me introduce you to the mechanic table. I've tried to break down all the possible mechanics and smash up in some kind of logical way. To be clear, this isn't every mechanic broken down into its smallest possible part. Some mechanics could be broken down further, but I didn't feel there was any value in doing that, and it would make the table even bigger and harder to see on the screen. So for example, extra actions play on could be broken down further to say play on minions or play on base, but does it really need to be broken down to such granularity? It functions fine as an indicator of conditional extra actions. You also won't see dueling or burying on here, because actually what do? Dueling, for example, usually results in extra action plays, destruction, or another effect that's already captured in the table, so again it's not really necessary. And as you can see, the table is broken down into all the mechanics that affect you, all the ones that affect your opponent, and all the ones that affect bases. So why did I do this? Well, when I made my All-Star faction, I picked the minions first, because I already had most of the minions in mind that I wanted, and then as I mentioned before, it's the minions that win you the game, the actions need to complement them. So the reason for the table then is to see exactly what my minions do, and in what quantity, so that I can see where the actions need to patch up weaknesses and double down on the strengths. Let's start with the power 2s. Tenacious C first. So Tenacious C provides me with an extra minion play throughout the game, and those extra minion plays come from the discard pile, so that's also recovery. First Mate, so this gives the faction a phase 3 effect. You could maybe argue that First Mate is a movement card as well, but I'm going to keep it just to phase 3, as you only get that movement effect in phase 3. Sprout, so this gives us card draw, search, and an extra minion play, as we're searching the deck for the minion, drawing it, and playing it. Finally, the mana spot just goes down as card draw. Power 3s now. The Frog Prince gives us an extra minion play from the discard pile, so that's recovery as well, and it also returns to the deck. Spartan is simply a permanent power machine. The Invader provides a victory point. Power 4s now. The Archmage provides us with extra action plays, and Stoneford provides us with card draw and search. And finally, for the King Minion, Eliza, and for the first time we're going over to the other side of the table, and I'm putting Eliza down as minion, action, and special blocking. Now we know that this effect is only in play when your opponents try to play more than one extra card, but I still think it's a fair classification. Now what does this tell me? Well, my philosophy behind the faction was always to do what I do as consistently as possible, and it doesn't really matter then what my opponents are doing, because if my strategy or faction is the strongest at the table, then I'm going to win it every time. Trying to disrupt your opponent's strategy, so all these mechanics on the right of the screen, is what you do to try and slow them down so that you can catch up or move ahead. Typically when their way of playing the game or when their strengths are just better than yours. If your faction is just fundamentally better, you don't need to slow your opponents down, they need to slow you down. The obvious exception in my faction, as you can see from the table, is Eliza. I just couldn't ignore Eliza because of how ridiculously good the card ability is. It's always in effect when Eliza is in play, and it applies to all opponents. So many factions can play more than 3 cards in a turn, and what better way to slow their game right down, but also protect your faction from their extra plays, than Eliza. Where are my strengths and what are my weaknesses? Well, I'm a big fan of gaining victory points independently of bases, and what better way to speed up your path to victory than free uncontested victory points? I already have the one effect in the Invader, so I definitely want an additional means of gaining a victory point. I currently only have one way of gaining permanent power, and that's isolated to the Spartan. I also have one of the best minions in the game to give power counters to in the First Mate, so I definitely want, again, at least one more card that will provide a permanent power increase. I have some of the strongest minions in the game in Eliza, Archmage and First Mate that want to stay in play, so I need to have some way to protect them, but currently I have no protective effects, so I want at least one card that can do that. Phase 3 plays are some of the strongest plays in the game to be able to change the result of a base by surprise. My only Phase 3 play so far triggers after the base scores, so I definitely want at least one card that triggers before a base scores. I also don't have a movement card. I think it's important to have at least one, so as to triangulate power in one base, but also to keep Archmage and Eliza in play longer if required. I'm playing some of the strongest minions and actions in the game. My recovery is currently limited to minions through the Frog Prince, so I definitely want a way to recover minions and actions, and ideally directly to the hand or in play. I'm a big fan of card draw as well, and while I do have 2 powerful search draw effects and an ongoing coin flip ability, I definitely want at least 2 good draw cards. I'd also like more extra plays for both minions and actions, so you can see how quickly space gets eaten up. 10 slots sounds like a lot, but when you realise how much you actually need to cover, it really isn't. You've just heard how much I need, and I haven't even been able to consider cards that might be good against my opponent, or to manipulate bases yet. Just to remind you, because I've already selected 10 factions, I can't pick any actions from those factions. For some, it's not a big issue. However, those factions did have some very strong cards, and these are the ones that I would have strongly considered had I been able to. My first pick then is Cosplay for the Geeks, and for those who watched the Power 4s video, this is why I couldn't take Felicia Day or Wil Wheaton. I mentioned that I wanted another card that provided a standalone VP, and this realistically is the best action that can do this. Not only can I play this when scoring on a base, but I can also play it when playing the Invader, so it's not as restricted as it might seem. I can't take Happily Ever After as I've already picked a Princess card, and Happily Ever After isn't as good anyway. Playing base actions, they can be more vulnerable, they're more easily blocked than standard actions, and unless you play this on the turn that you break the base, it can also potentially be counterplayed. Shady Deal is far more restrictive to play than Cosplay. Last Dance, because I have no way of exploiting the effect, is a symmetrical effect, which of course is no benefit to me. Viking Funeral is also restrictive as it can only be played on Power 5 minions, and if I played it on Eliza it would mean I couldn't play Eliza again, which is a big no-no for me. This slot to gain an extra VP is one that I would want to play as many times as possible, so the Seal is Broken is also not realistic because the second time you play it, you essentially gain nothing. Now I know that's not strictly accurate because if you hit 15 victory points first and you're at least 2 points ahead of second place, then the victory point loss from the 2 Madness cards wouldn't matter, but it's still inferior to Cosplay, so Cosplay it is, action number 1. For my second action I'm going for a movement card. There are lots of vanilla movement cards in the game that let you just move a minion, but remember I'm trying to make the most powerful faction in the game here, not a vanilla one. I want a movement card that does more than just move. Something like Air Jaws for the Sharks, but as I said earlier, none of my minions are really focused on antagonistic effects. Unless more cards are dedicated to this, it doesn't really feel like there's a lot of value in destroying just one minion. I wanted permanent power increases as well, so Headlong is a viable consideration. I can move a minion and give it +2 power. That is great for the first mate, but then the placement of the counters is quite restrictive, and there are better power counter cards. The same goes for Ocean Tattoo, but this is much more restrictive despite it being a continual effect. I just can't move a minion when I need to with this card, which is what I'm looking for here. The final decision, however, was very easy. My second action then is You Shall Pass from the Sheep. The previous cards we've looked at do 2 different things. This card does an incredible 3 things, and they're all effects that I actually wanted, so movement, card draw, and an extra action play. This is simply an amazing card, and it highlights where I'm going to be going with the action picks, cards that satisfy several requirements in one card. Let's talk about probably the most boring, but one of the most important actions, the recovery action. With a faction of some of the best minions and actions in the game, I want to be able to play them again, without having to wait for my deck to run out and shuffle my discard pile to form a new deck. My pick for this slot then is Chicken Soup from the Grannies. It was important that the card was able to recycle both minions and actions. Quite a few recovery cards only let you do one or the other. It was also important that the cards were either immediately played, if that wasn't possible then return to hand, if that wasn't possible then to the top of the deck. I didn't want the cards to be shuffled in or placed on the bottom of the deck. There are a number of cards that shuffle in or place on the bottom, but there are no cards that let you immediately replay or add to hand for more than one card and for either minions or actions. It's always one or the other. So Chicken Soup was the most flexible and strongest recovery card available. With Chicken Soup, for instance, I could play the Invader and Cosplay on top of my deck and then gain 2 VP the next turn. Let's tick off another boring but necessary action, the Protective Effect. There are a few play-on-base actions that provide universal protection. There are many more that provide protection but not in a universal way. The best card available is actually Don't Mess With My Babies from the Grannies faction, but as we've just seen I picked Chicken Soup so that's not an option. The best remaining card then in this slot is Protector Fields from Star Roamers, and you might be thinking they're literally the same effect, but Don't Mess With My Babies can be played without having a minion at the base, whereas if your opening hand is 5 actions, one of which is Protector Fields, you can't actually play it. For all intents and purposes though, it is the same card, however Don't Mess With My Babies is slightly more flexible. Let's recap now. On my list of wants I've covered a card that provides victory points, a recovery card, a protective effect, and a movement card. I've also added a little bit of draw and an extra action play. That leaves more card draw, extra plays, permanent power, and a phase 3 play outstanding. So let's turn to the phase 3 play next. My pick for a Before the Base Scores card with Full Sail unavailable is The Base Is Not Enough from the Super Spies. If you had to pick a card to fill this role and to cover as many circumstances as possible as a standalone card, I think most of the time I would turn to this card anyway. People may have thought of Hidden Ninja, but you need a good minion in hand to make the most of that, and the best outcome for me would be to just add 5 power. I don't have the Ninja Master Play up my sleeve. The Base Is Not Enough doesn't need any of your own minions in hand or on the base. Not only that, but in the best case scenario, taking control of a power 4 minion, that's an 8 power swing from your opponent to you. That's a lot better than using Hidden Ninja to add power, or using Picked Up to move power away, or destroying one of your opponent's minions. That power swing is most of the time going to be better than giving each of your minions +1 power. It's certainly better than playing an action from the deck as a special action, because my actions so far don't have the potential swing factor, and spoilers, they won't either. So that's 5 picks down and 5 to go. I want to turn to draw power next. The gold standard draw card is Tribute for Vikings, a straight draw 3. While that would be a fairly safe pick, I mentioned before that I'm looking for cards that do multiple things, that are more synergistic in general for my faction. So I wanted draw and I wanted permanent power. Well, that sounds like Fighting Spirit Prize to me. At a cost of 1 card draw, you gain 2 power counters wherever you like, and given that I had the first mate in my faction, for me this trade-off is absolutely fine. Increasing your power on bases permanently without playing more minions is excellent efficiency, and it also helps to move minions out of the range of common destruction effects. So for me, the loss of 1 card draw is worth the trade-off to gain power counter plays. I did consider I said no camels from the Explorers, but it was one or the other, and I'm really greedy and I want both effects. I want just 1 more card draw effect though to give me plenty of options, and no, I haven't forgotten, of course my faction is going to be playing Time Walker the Time Travellers. I mentioned that I wanted extra plays as well as card draw, well this card provides both. And the downside of it going to the bottom of the deck isn't a complete disaster, as you can play Stoneford to grab it straight from the bottom of the deck and play it into your hand again. This one was a definite no-brainer. I have almost covered everything I needed the actions to do. I'm still a little weak on permanent power gain, so I do want 1 more card for that. There aren't actually that many factions left that major on providing permanent power increases through their actions. Primarily there's the Monster Smash factions, Kung Fu Fighters, Polynesian Voyagers, they're the standouts. I did consider every possible card for this, and I came to the conclusion that the best universally good card left for me was Jolt from the Mad Scientists. Jolt has no downside, and if it can hit 4 or more minions with the effect, then that is incredible value. Yes, it's not a finishing card like Angry Mob, or a slow burn card like Uber Serum, it's just good value, and again it helps to develop the board state in a really efficient way. And with that pick I've actually achieved everything I needed to do with the actions to bolster my minions. But for those counting, that's actually 8 actions. I now have 2 luxury slots. Slots for actions that don't necessarily contribute to my own game state, but are actions that are strong in their own right. And of course I need a Kaiju action, but which one? Realistically it has to be either Wade Through the Buildings, Tail Smash, Radioactive Breath, or Stomp. A valid case can be made for any of them, but of these 4 I'm leaning more towards Wade Through the Buildings. Tail Smash and Radioactive Breath again would be my only card at the moment that destroys minions, and in isolation it really isn't very good or impactful to do that. I did have opportunities, as you've seen previously, to add other destruction effects in other slots, but again there needs to be critical mass of destruction effects, and I'd rather focus on my own game plan here. Stomp is good, it's akin to a Favour of Zeus, which I did consider, but I wanted something that would have more of an impact on the board state, and the opportunity to add 4 power, as well as destroy all play on base actions, can really help in some matchups. Think Truckers, Steampunks, Ancient Incas, Killer Plants, those sort of factions, but also in many games, because actually most factions have 1 or 2 play on base actions anyway. For the final card there were a few strong contenders. I had considered maybe 100 actions when making this video. There were several factions that had multiple good action cards that could easily have made the list, but the one I ultimately picked just served a better purpose. So these are cards such as Mindraker, Mass Teleport, Hello Dolly, and Knitting Circle. So my shortlist at this stage now, with 19 factions picked and the mechanics or areas that I wanted to focus on covered, was 7 cards big. In reverse order, first up we have Care Package from the Teddy Bears. I was considering this for the dual extra minion and card draw slot, however, all it is really is a fair card. It doesn't blow me away, and although I would like another extra minion play, we don't always get what we want. Next up I have Fetch I Know Not Want, a very difficult card name to say. This is a great consistency card, and when you're already playing 9 strong actions, the ability to draw 2 of them at random is incredibly strong. However, although I'm all about consistency, I didn't really want any more consistency. I wanted the final slot to be something a little bit different. Next up is Let the Dog Out. This is a ridiculously strong card, and the power level, especially in a faction that can increase the power of their minions, is crazy. However, this plays into the other destruction options that we turned down. You need a reasonable concentration, as I've said, for destruction to be effective, and again, this would be my only card at this stage, and I don't really want to commit a lot of slots to something that doesn't improve my own strategy first and foremost. I'm bundling these two together, but next it's Rotary Slug Thrower and Unity of the Tribes. They're essentially the opposite of each other. One wants minion spread and the other wants minion concentration, but they're both finishing cards. And I don't think my faction, however, really plays into either game plan particularly well, as powerful as these cards are. Finally, the card that came so close but didn't make the grade is Ruins from the Dragons. I like gaining victory points independently of bases, and if I can't gain them, how about making other people lose them? Ruins is an absolutely bonkers card, and it came so close to making my list. However, there was one other card that I think is even stronger than Ruins. So the final action card in my faction is Mark of Sleep from the Tricksters. Yes, you heard that right, a Tricksters card actually made it into the faction. And the reason I went for Mark of Sleep is because the ability to stop an opponent from playing actions on a turn of your choice is unbelievably strong. Actions are half the game and half your turn in Smash Up. Yes, some factions are more or less dependent on actions than others, but in general that is the case. You've seen from this list alone how good action cards can actually be. They can be finishers, they can replenish your hand, they can gain you victory points, they can do so many things, and to stop all of that even for just one turn is too powerful to turn down. So that's it, the actions are complete. Just to remind you, my chosen actions are Cosplay, You Shall Pass, Chicken Soup, Protector Fields, The Base Is Not Enough, Fighting Spirit Prize, Time Walk, Jolt, Wade Through the Buildings, and Mark of Sleep. And with that, the faction is now finished. This was a very difficult list to make, and that was part of the reason why I was putting this video off for so long. What do you think of my overall faction? What did you make of my action picks? What actions would you have chosen? Let me know down in the comments below, and I'll see you all next time. Goodbye.